Hi, my name is Lily, and this is my final presentation video for biblical literature. Today I'm just going to be talking about some key points that I had in my essay. So I started off by talking about the theme of the Bible, and to me the most clearly visible theme is God's faithfulness, and I think this can be seen through his working through the Israelites, sustaining them as a people, and ultimately bringing about Christ through the line of Judah, who lived a perfect life and atoned for the sin of the world through his perfect death and resurrection. The plot of the Bible, in terms of conflict and resolution, the conflict is established very early on in the Bible when Adam and Eve are instructed to not eat of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, and they disobey God's command and they eat the fruit of that tree because they are deceived by the serpent, which is the devil in the form of an animal, and by doing that they bring sin into the world. And the resolution comes later on in the New Testament when Christ lives a perfect life and dies a perfect atoning death, where he takes on the wrath of God and he pays for the sins of all humanity. Storyline of the Bible starts off with Adam and Eve. They are the first created humans. Later on, Abraham comes along, and the Abrahamic covenant is a very important part of the Bible, and it's basically where God is blessing Abraham. He promises blessing over his descendants. He also promises Abraham that his descendants will be very great and that they will be as numerous as the stars in the sky. Later on, Israel is established as a people, and they are living in Egypt for quite a while, and it gets to the point where they're being really oppressed and they're in slavery there. So God appoints Moses to lead them out of Egypt, and they wander through the wilderness a bit, and they receive the 10 Commandments from God. Moses is kind of their leader. He helps give the law to them and instruct the people, and he ultimately brings them to the Promised Land, where they are then established as a nation. They then enter a period of kingship where they have a lot of different kings, and then later on, quite a few years later, they go through exile. So the Babylonians are holding them in captivity, and this is a time of where a lot of people in Israel doubt God's plan and they lose hope in God. But shortly after that, Cyrus the Great comes through. He frees the Israelites from their exile and allows them to return back to Jerusalem. And then John the Baptist comes around. He paves the way for Christ, and then Christ comes. He begins his ministry on earth, and he establishes the kingdom of God and the early church, which the early church, after Christ dies and resurrects and then ascends back to heaven, the early church continues to be faithful and to continue out the work of the kingdom. They are persecuted while they're in Israel by their religious leaders, and this actually benefits them, even though it seems negative at first, because they are allowed to be scattered into the surrounding nations, and they can now teach the gospel to them. And Paul is a good example of this. He established many different churches through his journeys all around Israel. And the Bible finishes up with Revelation, which is John's vision of the new heaven and new earth that is to come and is to replace the old earth that we have now. After that, I then moved on to talk about the 6 scriptural acts, and the first 3 of these acts are creation, rebellion, and redemption initiated, where God chooses Israel to be a holy people. And then there's a brief interlude in between the first 3 acts and the last 3 acts, where it's the intertestamental period where Israel is exiled under Babylon. The last 3 acts include the coming of Christ, the spreading of the good news, and redemption accomplished through Christ's return. After that, I talked a bit about the connections between the Old Testament and the New Testament, and I think the biggest connections that stood out to me are prophecies being given in the Old Testament and then being fulfilled in the New Testament. After that, I talked about the job of us in the church today, and I think the Great Commission at the end of Matthew is a very good, clear instruction of what we should be doing, and it talks about going and making disciples of all the nations and also to teach to others all that Christ has commanded to do. Something new that I learned from this class and reading this book this semester was kind of about the Israelites through the intertestamental period and how this made them expect a great military leader as their Messiah. And it made me understand a little bit why a lot of the Israelites during Jesus' day and time did not believe that he was the Son of God. Alright, those are just some key points and a brief overview of my essay, and thank you guys so much for watching.